Hi everyone, hello. Welcome to our Wan Hai Hotel program today. My name is Joni Zhu. I am the head of programs and research here at the Rockbund Art Museum in Shanghai. And the program today is organized in conjunction with the Wan Hai Hotel exhibition downstairs and also artist Ringden Johnson's solo exhibition, Best Synthetic Answer upstairs. So together, these two exhibitions and our program today is probing into the question of complex geographies that the museum is research into, and specifically at the moment, the direction into the Pacific Ocean. And so to introduce the program a little bit, to exist as Shanghai, which is a name that literally translates to upper sea, is to be born of rivers and seas. And at the center of Wan Hai Hotel lies the expansive vision of Tonga thinker Apli Hawaifa, whose ideal of the Sea of Islands manifests a boundless expanse of continuity, shared histories, and flowing networks rather than isolated territories. So we're taking this name of a really humble Chinatown hotel in Penang, Malaysia, Wan Hai Hotel, to bring together connected tissue of global Chinatown network and a lucent constellation that is unconfined by national boundaries. And today's program at Wan Hai Hotel is the fourth gatherings, which is named Securing Paradise, Militarization and Tourism, which spotlights the stories and places in and alongside the Pacific Ocean that are devastated by colonial militarization and later loomed large in the touristic imagination, and popular culture disseminated with travel and wars as jazz populated the Pacific region. So today we have the privilege to have two keynotes from Brisbane-based Quandamooka artist Megan Cope, Haidong-born Berlin-based artist Song Tun. And after each keynote presentation, we'll move to the fourth floor for Papua New Guinea-born Melbourne-based pianist and composer Aaron Cholai's improvised piano performance, where Aaron will improvise with the real-time speculative animation of Ringden Johnson's work. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce artist Megan Cope, who is a Quandamooka artist from Moreton Bay, North Stradbroke Island. Her site-specific sculptural installations, public art projects, paintings, and video works investigates issues relating to colonial histories and the environment, as well as mapping practices. Her work often resists prescribed notion of Aboriginality and examines psychogeographies that challenge the grand narratives of Australia and our sense of time and ownership in a settler-colonial state. Megan is a member of Aboriginal artist collective proppaNOW, a recipient of the 2022 to 2024 Jane Lombard Prize of Arts and Social Justice. And in 2024, she received the Creative Australia Award for Emerging and Experimental Arts. And in 2017 to 19, she was the official Australian war artist, commissioned by the Australian War Memorial. Megan's solo exhibition include Whisper at Sydney Opera House in 2023, Fractures and Frequencies at UNSW Galleries in Sydney in 2021, the Black Nepalian Australian Print Workshop in Melbourne in 2019. She has recently just been featured in numerous group exhibitions, including Hawaii Triennial that just opened, and Sharjah Biennial that just opened, as well as ever-present a National Gallery of Australia in 2024, proppaNOW, There Goes the Neighborhood, a Vera List Center in New York in 2023, Busan Biennial in 2022, We on the Rising Wave also in Busan, Reclaim the Earth in Palais de Tokyo in Paris in 2022, among many others. Welcome, Megan.
Good afternoon. Ni hao. Thank you, Joni and Tintin and the team here at the Rockbund Art Museum for the privilege to be here today. And thank you to for the wonderful program that you've created. I just pay my respects to my ancestors and family members who have survived the past few centuries despite much adversity that they have endured. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to the ancestors here of this land and people of Shanghai. I acknowledge your culture and traditions as strong and continuous, and thank you for having me as a guest here in Shanghai. Today I will talk about my cultural heritage and worldviews that have been shaped by my father's community. I have mixed heritage. My father is Indigenous and my mother is not. She is Australian, which can mean many things. But my work is very much informed by my upbringing with my father's people, the Quandamooka people. And we are comprised of 3 tribal groups: the Nunakul, Nuki and Gurrumpul peoples. And we identify as Quandamooka, which is our land. Oh, wrong way maybe. So this is an image of our country. It is like a archipelago, and with 2 main islands, Minjerribah, which means place of mosquitoes, and Mogumpan. And as you can see, it's like a paradise. And certainly in Queensland, in Australia, we have a lot of tourism, and it was very interesting. A few years ago, we entered an agreement with the state to provide cultural tourism so that the Aboriginal people can kind of inform people's cultural experience of the place. One of the things that I thought was very humorous was they tried to make translation of Minjerribah to be Island of the Sun, and the community had a lot of discussion, laughing because actually it means place of mosquitoes. Not so great for tourism, but useful to know. So here is a picture of myself and my father, our dog, in the 80s in Australia. Contrary to the grand narratives of Australia, of Aboriginal people simply surviving almost by accident as hunters and gatherers, our culture was and still is complex and sophisticated. Our ancestors developed very philosophical and sustainable culture that was governed through kinship structures in relation to land. Land and people are not separate. We believe that the land and waters created us and all living things, and that the animals taught us the laws of nature, because animals have been on the planet much longer than us. For instance, Yallingbilla, which is the humpback whale, has been in the ocean for 880,000 years. Yallingbilla tells us when certain seasons are ready. So they hold knowledge of the ocean, and we anticipate their arrival in June and July every year. A lot of my work in the past decade has been connected to the story of middens. Middens are shell piles made by ancestors. Archaeologists have been able to verify our continuous existence for 37,000 years in the place that you saw earlier. So, because of this, I think it is fair to say that our old people had very sophisticated way of living for a long time in the same place. These middens are not there anymore. When the British came to Australia, they saw the shell piles as a ready source of building material, calcium carbonate to produce lime, to make cement. And still today, cement is reliant on the extraction of oyster reefs, ancient reefs in the sea, and on land. Calcium carbonate is extracted from ancient limestone formations that were once reefs in the ocean that are now the land. I'm very much interested in talking to these formations as a form of Aboriginal architecture, because really it says that our people have been able to live in the same place for 37,000 years, so therefore this is a site of the home. Whilst it's not contained within four walls, it's quite remarkable that we can survive in one place for so long. This slide is kind of an introduction of what an elder, Dr. Mary Graham, Auntie Mary Graham, is an Aboriginal philosopher in Australia, and she articulates the basic precepts of the Aboriginal worldview and the things that underpin our philosophical framework. And it is based on, three questions. How do we live together in a particular area, nation, or on earth without killing each other off? How do we live without substantially damaging the environment? And why do we live? And this question, we need to find the answer that does not make people feel alienated, lonely, or murderous. And this is, I think, a very fundamental question, and the reason why artists are so important in the world. Artists are always asking this question. The two axioms also that are fundamental to the Aboriginal worldview or kinship structure is that 1, the land is the law, and 2, you must always know you are not alone in the world. For us, the land is a sacred entity. It is not property or real estate. It is the great mother of all humanity. And the dreaming, it's a combination of meaning about life and all reality. It's an action guide to how to live. The two most important kinds of relationship in life are, firstly, those between land and people, and secondly, those among people themselves. The second always being contingent upon the first. The land and how we treat it determines our humanness. Because land is sacred and must be looked after, the relation between people and land becomes the template for society and social relations. Therefore, all meaning of life comes from land and water. It's important to understand that we are not alone in the world. We have a kinship structure which extends into land, and this system was and still is organised into clans. One's first loyalty is to one's own clan group. It does not matter how Western or urbanised Aboriginal people have become, this kinship structure never changes. Every clan group has its own dreaming or explanation of how we came to be in this world, and we believe that a person finds their individuality within the group. To behave as if you are a discrete entity or a conscious isolate is to limit yourself to being an observer in an observed world. For instance, our people, our clan groups are governed by the dolphin, buangan, the oyster, pearl oyster, quampi, we call it, and kabul, carpet snake. And these three creatures inform how we relate to the land and each other. So, when it comes to military, it's quite interesting to me. In 1824, the British arrived on our country, and they brought with it this 73rd Regiment on foot. It was a British elite force, and it landed on Turrbal country in an area that is now known as Redcliffe, or Humpibong in local language. The settlement was abandoned a year later and relocated to the place where the city of Brisbane stands today. There are multiple records citing the reasons for relocation, including overwhelming mosquito populations, lack of fresh water, and hostility from the native populations, the Turrbal people. This map is a military map of Brisbane, of this area, of where the city is today. So the mapping works, for me, I wanted to share the way my family and people see the world. So I use military maps and I work over those maps. And I put our language names back over those maps. But also I'm interested in challenging our sense of deep time. So I also generate a sea level rise over these maps so that we can understand that whilst things in geological time or earth time can move very slowly, our culture and our people remember deep time. So when I say deep time, I mean the time before now, but that we inherit. So our people remember events such as sea level rise occurring. We remember it through song and stories, and we have many, many stories about when the sea level rose 5,000 years ago. So I thought, to continue this understanding of geological time, I wish to generate a 5-metre sea level rise so that we can understand that these things are changing. And also that there are other people who have other names for the places. Here's another view of my country, or our country. Between 1867 and 1933, another penal colony operated. This one was Nagoon, St Helena Island, in the centre of Quandamooka country. It was established to address the overcrowding in Brisbane's jails, and it was Australia's first self-sufficient reformative system designed to rehabilitate inmates. More than 9,000 men were incarcerated in a racially segregated system, and the island functioned both as a prison and quarantine station. The economic activity was powered by forced convict labour and included agriculture, with more than 50 acres of land dedicated to growing sugarcane, which men processed, animal husbandry, brick making, and the manufacturing of clothes, ropes and boots. This same island, which we call Nagoon, our ancestors would camp there during the oyster season and also eat other things like fruit bat. But this place became the centre of early cement production for the colony to establish itself. And in 1869, a bell-shaped kiln was built for lime burning. Much of the quick lime was sourced from natural tidal accumulations of coral and oyster reef, and also from the monumental shell piles built by our ancestors. This is a work that I made in 2009, and it's a sound and projection still overlooking. It's actually on a military fort called Fort Lytton, and I decided to make this sound installation with a recording of our war chant. This work was important to me because in Australia, the colonial narrative is that when the British came, there was no war, that Aboriginal people did not fight for their country and did not understand that they were being invaded. And for Aboriginal people, this is insulting because absolutely we fought for our country and absolutely we knew what was happening. And I decided to make this work with a war chant being positioned with speakers on the outside of the fort. So when people were inside, it sounded like there were Aboriginal people on the outside surrounding the event. And my hope in that work was for people to perhaps reconsider the mythology that is part of Australia's foundation, that we were not sophisticated to understand invasion. So I just want to apologise if this is too much reading, but again, some words from Auntie Mary Graham from her Modernising Relations Between Indigenous People and States. And so, you know, the question of war and peace. Relations between states and Indigenous people have reached a critical stage in development. After 500 years, physical subjugation is all but complete. The passing of the period of subjugation does not mean an end to hostilities. In Australia, the frontier situation was generally understood by Aboriginal people, soldiers and authorities, settlers, missionaries and others that there existed a war situation, albeit without an official declaration of war being announced. In Australia, the British used a mandate called terra nullius to take our land. Terra nullius meaning land without a people. War is declared. Engagement in battle commences. Combat dispositions change over time and place. The opposition is subdued, victory is won or lost, and surrender is acknowledged. In Australia, this is not clear. There's no finalisation of the combat period and there is no treaty, and Aboriginal people still maintain that they have not surrendered their sovereignty. While activity of conflict can be very unclear because of its volatility, the outcome of conflict is reasonably clear in one way or another. While the majority of Aboriginal people in Australia have mixed opinions about being in a state of war with white Australia, they agree that they and many of their families, relatives and friends do not live in peaceful relationships with Western people or systems. does the acceptance of Western political regimes imply surrender? Are they, the regimes, really accepted, or are they imposed and attempts to understand and utilise them to their full capacity obstructed? To be under a state of complete bureaucratic, political, economic and administrative dependency is to be in a state of being occupied. I acknowledge that this is quite political content, but you know, going back to militarization and tourism, war and peace, these types of extreme binaries, you know, is what I think motivates me as an artist. I'm constantly trying to see the unseen and to show other people what we don't always see. I'm interested in place names because place names connect us to things that may have been changed or altered through colonisation. Many of our place names indicate natural resources. They tell us then what is in the ecosystems, and then we know how we can relate to those ecosystems. Again, just looking at these things, a lot of things, my work is political, but it is playful. We have many politicians talking about economics and power. I thought this would be a good kind of artwork to make. At the time, our politicians were saying Australia needs to tighten the purse strings, become more austere, and that the age of entitlement is over. And I thought this was very interesting and decided to make a playful work that could see the word entitlement inside of enlightenment. Because for us and Western kind of philosophical foundations, the age of enlightenment is what brought civilization to the non-Western world. And this is over Cook's map of discovery. Captain Cook, I'm not sure if you heard of him. Here's some other works where I try to reclaim country and share the place names and peoples over familiar landscapes. So this is in Melbourne, or Naarm, and it is acknowledging the Woiwurrung peoples. I'm also very interested in critiquing how Australia and the British Empire became the most powerful and wealthy in the world during the early 1800s. And to this day, Australia is a country with great mineral wealth and extraction, and this is, you know, the core part of our economy. And in these works, I wanted to acknowledge the gold that was extracted from Warrawurrung country and Djadjawurrung country. These are also interesting times because this was a time when many Chinese people immigrated to Australia, and actually a lot of family groups began that were both Chinese and Aboriginal. It was on the goldfields that these relationships were formed on the fringes, and, you know, because of racism, these relationships formed. And our peoples were able to survive together amongst the hostility. But this is from Victoria also, which was kind of the centre of what are called the first mining boom. So this piece of writing from Linda Tuhiwai Smith is a Maori philosopher, and she wrote a very important book called Decolonising Methodologies, Research and Indigenous Peoples. And she says that it appalls us that the West can desire, extract and claim ownership of our ways of knowing, our imagery, the things that we created and produce, and then simultaneously reject the people who created, developed those ideas, and seek to deny them further opportunities to be the creators of their own culture and own nations. It angers us when practices linked to the last century and centuries before that are still employed to deny the validity of Indigenous peoples' claim to existence, to land and territories, the right of self-determination, to the survival of our languages and forms of our cultural knowledge and our natural resources and systems for living within our environment. So around 2016, all these ideas and how to make an art practice kind of crystallized, because I realized that a lot of people didn't know what middens were and how significant they are to our people. And so I started to make middens, or simulate middens. I just acknowledge I could never make middens as large as our ancestors did because it took them 37,000 years to make those. But nonetheless, looking at these shell piles and talking about what they mean for us, and how they can reshape our imaginary and relationship with land. I decided to talk about the mining that happened on our country, the mining of the middens, the mining of the seafloor, and kind of the cultural antagonism that comes. There was an article I came across where some environmental groups and Aboriginal people were lobbying and advocating for the preservation of a midden located at the Surf Life Saving Club. And in Australia, the Surf Life Saving Club is a very important cultural site. It's on the beach. It's a culture where people learn how to swim in the ocean. If you haven't been to Australia, the ocean is very strong. But there's also quite a big drinking culture that happens in the Surf Life Saving Club. I read this article where the local councillor at the time dismissed the environmentalists and the Aboriginal people's request to preserve this midden, and said that Aboriginal people were too lazy to make those shell piles, and that they were the result of the wind and tide. So in response to this article, I decided to make a midden with beer cans with all the colours and in the shape of the Union Jack, which is the British flag, just to remind people of the origins of this culture. This work is one from 2017, and it was to pay respects to the midden that was at the site of where the Sydney Opera House is today. And I won't go into that now because there's some more images later, but basically the material is hand-cast concrete, cement, and 12,000 shells to connect the material with the object, I guess, to talk about this extraction and material politics. When I first wanted to talk about this story, I thought about connecting a slab of concrete with the oyster rising. And what I found through many conversations with audiences who were seeing my work, they didn't know what middens were. So I left this idea and went to make a more explicit form as part of the story. But in many ways, reformation, the shell piles and foundations go together to tell this story. You can see both sides here, the front and the back of the artwork. This is an exhibition called Unlearning Australia, which was in partnership with Art Space Australia and the Seoul Museum of Art in Korea. And this was the work in the Busan Biennale in 2022. And so after many years of talking about the devastation and loss and the big interruption that has occurred on our country, I started to think more how do we return to paradise? How do we create a sense of autonomy, and how do we return as Aboriginal people to care for country and do the things that we want to do, instead of always responding to the continual violence, even though sometimes it is subtle or indirect. This sense that we are always at war, I got maybe a little bit tired of that. And perhaps the discussion of extraction also became tiring and maybe negative, and a state of grief. I started to think a lot more about what is the role of the museum, and what is the relationship of our ancestral objects inside a museum. We know that a lot of things were stolen during this time of violence, and a lot of these things that are in museums are also, in a way, ordinary objects, utilitarian objects, bags, weapons, tools, these sorts of things. I started to think about the power relations between when a museum has these things that are ordinary and everyday, and out of the hands of the people who, no longer have the means to make them. Now we are just surviving. My family are fishermen, fisherwomen, were coastal people, and actually quite poor. So I started to think about how can I use the power of the museum, the resources of the arts, and bring this back to the community. And I start to ask my relatives also, what do they want to do? What do they want to see? And we talked a lot about our relationship with oysters. Oysters are very important to us. We call oyster kinyangara in our language. So also this idea that museums hold objects that, if they're everyday objects, when they are in our hands, they are alive and they are helping us live. When they're in the museum, they are maybe dead. So thinking about this contrast and thinking, well, can art be living? How can we make art objects or cultural objects alive? And what does art look like when it's outside of the museum? So Kinyangara Guinyamba is that for me. And I can't remember the next slide, but let's see. We'll just talk to this. Was the exhibition at the Sydney Opera House, and bringing these two worlds together, perhaps the middens, and then also the Kinyangara poles, so that people have an opportunity to consider the history of extraction and relationships with the ancestral middens, but also to then look to the future. And I should add that in Sydney, this place is called Warang, and it is the place of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And the site of the Sydney Opera House, very, very iconic building, was actually once also a midden. And this midden was said to be 15 metres high and 100 metres long. So quite a remarkable feature in the landscape. Now it is replaced with a very, very important cultural site for Australia. And it was a great honour and privilege to be invited to make this work and share with perhaps, the Indigenous perspective. So the idea of this work was to see the Sydney Opera House and, an Indigenous, through an Indigenous lens. So when I got the invitation, actually, I saw this first in my imagination, and I wanted to create a sculptural intervention with the architecture. And so I did this through looking at the monumental stairs and creating something that appears to be a monumental shell pile. So, but also connecting to the cement also. This monumental stairs is the largest free-poured slab of cement in the southern hemisphere. So I was looking at connecting this as well. The work for the Sydney Opera House was a community effort. So with the work Kinyangara Guinyamba, I invited the public to clean the shells, because once I did the drawings for the sculptures and did the calculations for shells, I realised I needed 85,000 shells, and this was too many for me to clean by myself. So I put the invitation out to the community in Sydney, and we start to clean the shells. And I called it the Scrub Club. And we ran the Scrub Club from a little... actually, it was a on a former military compound. Now it is a community centre. And this was in the drill hall. So the old drill hall became the studio, and we assembled the work. We cleaned all the shells, then we drilled all the shells, and then we put them together. We sourced all the shells from local restaurants. So why oyster shells? Maybe I jumped the Busan Biennale. I should have put a bit later in the presentation, but just going back to how we can make art as a community together, how we can care for country, and how we might work outside a museum to form better relations, or use art to form better relations with the land, comes from, you know, what we see. This is another view of Quandamooka country, and what you can see is an image of the mud that occurs after every time it rains. So now oyster populations globally are 97% extinct. Sometimes you can look at, you can do an internet search. Sometimes it says 85%, sometimes it says 97%. Regardless, 85% or 97% is still catastrophic for our seas. Because oysters are 200 million years old. They have been in our oceans for a very long time, and every time it rains now, they suffer a lot, and there are many mass die-offs. The oysters that we grow are for human benefit and consumption only. And for my community, we know that this is not right. So that's why we decided to make art and reefs together. So if you don't know, and if you don't mind, I'll just share some information about oysters, because I love them very much. And I like that this artwork can also become advocacy for oysters. So they are very important ecosystem engineers. Like coral, the oysters make up reefs that provide structures to support the entire marine ecosystems, including food, shelter, and a home for many fish and other animals. You can see without oysters, with oysters. Here are some images of what it looked like before the sea was, the intertidal zone was stripped. There were thousands and thousands of hectares of oyster reefs. And now they're under stress. A lot of our survival through the early colonisation was through working on the oyster banks. So our family was very lucky to be able to, in some ways, continue doing what we did before the British came, while the British were here. There's some early pictures working on the oysters. This is an image of the mangroves, which, you know, are part of the oyster kinship structure. And this is just some words about what Kinjangara Gonyamba is. I think I've already said a lot of these things, but the establishment of the sculptures are intended to form future oyster reefs, which will help return Indigenous cultural management to Yarrabinja. Yarrabinja is our word, Indigenous word for sea country, with the aim to eventually restore to its pre-colonial state. The place where the first oyster reefs were planted is connected to many families on the island and is an opportunity for the community to heal country and work to rectify the effects of colonisation. The restorative process creates a space for elders, artists and local oyster growers to impart knowledge with community members and emerging generations. This building of knowledge from oyster reefs and the surrounding ecosystem is integral to long-term sea management. And furthermore, as the artwork is fully functioning oyster reef, it will also operate as an ongoing asset for the Indigenous community and Quandamooka country as a model for innovation in art and cultural institutions. The work is very simple. The technology is very simple. It uses timber and oyster shell. When I was thinking about this work, my first thought was to return rocks to the intertidal zone. But I realised that this is in fact illegal. And it is illegal because it has rocks pose a risk and a threat to private property such as boats. And then I learned that it is not illegal to plant timber. So then I designed this object to return the calcium carbonate to the ocean. It's also illegal to put shells in the ocean. So it was a bit tricky to think how can I put the shells back in the ocean without breaking the law. So put the shells around the timber about waist height. So technically it's not touching the sea floor. And this also is beneficial to the environment because when it's positioned waist height, it is in the water column that moves a lot more. And so this maximizes it helps the oysters stay clean, because as we saw in the previous slide, when it rains, the mud can sometimes suffocate the oysters that are growing on the intertidal zone. This was our first series of workshops, and this was the studio just outside in the area where my family, who are the fishing family, they use this area to process the fish. We have one season that we anticipate, and in the winter, because in the winter it is the season of nundakal, and nundakal is like a mullet fish, and we love this fish very much. Before colonisation, our people used to hunt this fish together with Wangan, the dolphin, which is why we refer to the dolphin as our family member, because this season is what keeps us very healthy and strong. The fish is very high in omega-3 and we love it very much. But this season is marked by the arrival of the hairy caterpillar, and the hairy caterpillar goes across the ground, and then they all join together, and we see big lines of hairy caterpillar crawling across the ground, and they go in the lines and they go to one tree, the casuarina tree, and then when they go up the tree, this is the indicator to start watching the sky. And we watch the sky for the green parrot, and this parrot, it's like a rainbow lorikeet, and they like to fly in big groups together. And when the sun goes down, they're very, very active and very crazy. They've been having nectar all day, so maybe they are drunk and very raucous. But we look at this. We look at the clusters, because they fly around in big groups, and the size of the groups of these parrots give us an indication of how big the fish groups will be inside the ocean. So there is a relationship, seasonal relationship and environmental indicator of what we can anticipate. Once we observe this, we look to Minjerribah, which is the sea eagle. So when Minjerribah comes, he starts to travel out into the ocean and fly around the big shoals of fish, the nundakol. And we look at this circulation in relation to the size of the green parrot. Then Minjerribah will tell us it's ready, it's time to go and to catch the fish. And so how we do this, because they are in the deep ocean and only the sea eagle can go this far, the men get the spears and tap the ocean, tap the shore, and this is a call to Wangan, the dolphin, that we are hungry, it's time to go fishing. So Wangan goes out and circles the fish and brings it close to shore. And then the men go out with the nets, catch the fish. This is the old way that we used to fish. And our families still catch this fish, but now it's with, boats with an engine, and but we still net the fish. So we still catch it with the nets, bring it in now with a tractor. But this place where we had the studio is where then we process the fish. Now with this artwork, we make these poles in the opposite season of processing the fish. And the idea is so that the community have work after fixing the nets, of course. The reason we use the oyster shells is because it is a material, calcium carbonate, but also that the oyster oyster species has a code embedded in its DNA, and in that code, when an oyster is born, it exists like a plankton, like a microorganism, and it's travelling freely in the water current. But this DNA is looking for the ancestors, for the reef, and for this material to settle. So this is why we use the oyster shells, because they are like us. They like to grow with their ancestors in cities. This is the day we did our first planting, and I decided that we would do the first planting on the 26th of January. In Australia, the 26th of January is Australia Day, and for Aboriginal people this is Invasion Day or Survival Day. And I thought it would be nice to do something ceremonial, plant this for the future and make it a positive day for cultural reclamation. Yeah, this was the first one. And the idea is that, so Kinyangara Guinyamba is two languages of the two islands, Minjerribah and Morgumpan. Kinyangara meaning oyster, and Guinyamba meaning place of rocks. And so technically Kinyangara Guinyamba is not yet the sculptures are not yet oyster rocks. So the work is a site of becoming. And what will happen is that each of these poles, the oysters move in and grow and grow and grow into each other. And what we will see on the intertidal zone are these forms, circular and half circle. Eventually the timber will dissolve. But the timber we use is burugari, it's a cypress pine, and it's a timber that is endemic, like native and a lot of, on the island. And the cypress pine benefits from us cultivating the younger trees, so making space for the older trees to continue to grow. So it's very good, this composition of material, both for the land and the water. There's another view. I should mention that the place where we did this is very close to the place where it's called the mission. Everybody calls it the mission, Mayora Mission. So Mayora Mission is the place after the military arrived and conducted many massacres. The survivors of the massacres were put into one place. And so in order to kind of, I guess, take the land, they put our old people here. It's just not far from here. The memories of my relatives and old people say, you know, being on the mission was not so bad. we didn't have it as hard as other Aboriginal groups, because at least we were able to still access our traditional food. And when they say that, they are saying that they still had access to this exact place. So for me, it's very meaningful to make this artwork here, because it's suffered a lot, and it is time to bring life back and to reconnect with our relationship with the land as stewards, as protectors, as caretakers. You can see now there's 3. And you can see there's not really many oyster reefs on the ground like in the previous slides. So this is the idea. This is an image from last year. So it's 2 years after the first planting. And you can see that the oysters moved in. And they're living there and they're growing. They're very happy. So it goes from this blank one to this. And when we have healthy oyster population on the intertidal zone, this cleans the water and allows for clean water allows for sunlight to hit the seafloor. And when light hits the seafloor, then the seagrass can grow. And of course, many other species need seagrass, like turtles and dugong, or manatee, I think is another name. But also the pearl oyster, the quampi. The pearl oyster likes to have its babies in the seagrass. You can see aerial view. Actually, after the first planting, there was a very big flood, and I was living maybe 3 hours away from the island, and I had a studio in this place, and the flood took my studio, and I was thinking a lot about the poles. I kept thinking, oh no, maybe now the poles are gone. And actually no, the poles were very strong, and you can see that the colour of the water is very dirty. I was very happy to know that they survived the flood. And another amazing thing happened was this flood brought a lot of baby oysters. And you can see in the second image, the baby oysters moved in to those. This was just 3 months after the first planting. Oh, I think that's the last slide, actually. Oh, this is a video. Can we see if the video works? Maybe it doesn't. Oh, yeah? Oh. It's okay. We can stay here.
Thank you so much, Megan. We're going to open to the floor for some questions. Do we have any questions now? 那我先问问题，大家可以先想一想。I think with the audience who are not really familiar with the ideal of time and Aboriginal time, and since you mentioned the dreaming with a capital D a couple of times in the slides, could you tell our audience a bit more about dreaming time, Aboriginal time?
Sure. So, the dreaming is like our creation stories, and it's very much connected to time before time, maybe. The time where the land was of giants. And this is quite abstract, but in a way, the more I think about it, the more I'm beginning to understand it's the time when the non-human creatures on Earth ruled, perhaps. And so the dreaming is designed to give us a set of principles and knowledge that is very centered on the landscape and ecologies. And so then our philosophy and how we relate to country gives us purpose and meaning. So in a way, you know, we have many stories at home, and our community, we have many family groups, and I belong to the oyster and fishing families, and we have other family groups who are much better at storytelling and the maintaining the traditional songs and dances. But essentially, the dreaming is like, I guess, the Bible or the guide on how to live and how to be in the world. Yeah?
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. That was amazing. I was wondering, in my research on plankton, I learned that there was a lot of microplastics that were causing confusion for small fish, etc. And I was wondering if you noted any microplastic when the baby oysters came to live on the work.
Well, we haven't. My plan is to, in fact, do a PhD at the end of this year. It's interesting, you know, that art has brought me to this place now, and I realised, you know, we actually had a professor from the University of Queensland come and do this with us. So I think during this PhD we'll be able to determine whether this is happening. It's likely, unfortunately, I think, you know. But if we as people on the planet, the one thing that I think is really remarkable about the oyster is that it is universal. It is like everywhere. Everywhere that is connected to salt water and the ocean. So, you know, we can all have a role in this, and many places like New York have a really fantastic program of oyster reef restoration. It's happening everywhere. I have a suspicion that the oyster will be resilient and be able to adapt with the microplastics. I hope. Yeah.
Well, first, thank you for sharing. And during the lecture, I was very impressed by like how you tell the story of like the traditional way of Quandamooka people. They are hunting, they're fishing, like about the stories about the caterpillars, the green parrots, and together with the sea eagles and the dolphins. It's like really fascinating. I could picture the scene. And I was wondering like if, because you say like, I think most people are not using this kind of way of fishing. So is it like only a kind of oral tradition for now, or you have like things like texts or paintings to record that? And if you have like any artworks or like any other related research that could show like the details about the stories of this kind of traditional lifestyle of this indigenous group.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. I mean, now in the modern world, everything has changed so much, but everybody gets very excited because the hairy caterpillars still come, and then we still remember when they come and what it means, and we all talk to each other. It's down the shops getting bread and milk. Did you see? They're coming. Oh, I saw some near my place. This traditional knowledge is still something that we share and talk about and get very excited about. So in a way, we know we still practice the process of remembering what it means, and the meaning is very important. In terms of season, and also teaching young people also what it means. And in that way, I guess that is how we continue. There are many artists on the island where I'm from, and most people still living quite hard times, but they do painting and much more traditional style. I decided to go to university and study art, and so when this happened, I learnt a new language, maybe you could say, and was thinking about who I am, who I belong to, where I come from, and how I could make contemporary art that remembers these things. But certainly it's important for us as a community that every family has its role, because then together we have a healthy ecology of people working together and benefiting each other. But yeah, it's very, very exciting. And when the hairy caterpillar comes, it's very exciting, because we're very much looking forward to eating that fish. And there are many events throughout the year where the families who do the songs and dances, they perform this and they teach the young children this as well. But I don't belong to this family, but we are related and we experiencing these things together during those times on the island.
Your first speech is pretty impressive. I appreciate that you have share some practices or experiments outside the museum, just like how you reclaiming your community or stars outside the Sydney Opera. I just have a question because I wonder how you come up with the ideas you have combined the ecosystem protection with your clan culture. And have you ever think of push this idea further? So we are care about the sustainability and the climates like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about that because I think that the old way of museums holding treasures, all the treasures of the world, particularly in Europe, I think it is a little bit strange, and it's also very amazing to have this conversation in this building, because this building was also like that, you know, foreigners coming and capturing the plants and the animals and studying them and making decisions about them and making determinations about them. So I like to think that this is maybe an old way, and a new museum, or the museum of the future that is in the making now, could have a more remedial relationship. This is a fantasy, an ideal, but I think it is something that many young people want to see, and also many old people want to see too, and that we want to do this together. So this idea, I think, is I think successful so far. The only complaint I have is that in the past 2 years since the first planting, now I'm not there making planting. I'm going around the world talking about the idea, and all I want is to be there doing this again. So I have to work on establishing a framework and a model that is in the calendar and in time for making, and then the seasonal planting. And one of the things I think I would like to do is develop maybe like a foundation. So maybe museums that are interested in this idea can invest some resources, some capital, so that this program can continue, even if I'm somewhere else, and that the community is ready to receive people who want to work. And that's what I would like to develop over the next couple of years. And I think a PhD could also help articulate this vision and potential. Because I think so far the only opportunity for this kind of restorative environmental practice is with town planning or private developments that maybe have more consciousness, environmental consciousness. And I think that art museums could really take this in greater speed, you know, because we know that artists are the people asking these questions, and will come up with solutions and find a language that is not alienating to the public. Yeah.
Hello, Megan. Thanks for your wonderful talk. The picture of the Gold Coast make me remind me of my pleasure time wandering along the Bondi Beach maybe 10 years ago. So I was just wondering, because you mentioned museums, mentions the PhD, mentioned universities. Are there any other forms of culture propagations that existed now in Australia, for especially in the primary schools or middle schools, that can have a more much closer to the younger children, especially for the children or teenagers come from the indigenous families. Do they live in harmony with other, other countries or other not indigenous children? Thank you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, these things are quite often determined by the political cycle. And in Australia, we have 3 political parties, but 2 main parties. And historically, Labor Party, which was founded as the Workers' Party, had much more inclusive policies. And so over the past 40 years, and 20 years in particular, there have been some great successes where local Indigenous elders are employed in the schools to teach young people language, but also the local relationships with the areas. So if you go to school in Bondi Beach, you learn the Indigenous cultural relations with the land, and it would be different to that on a Gold Coast. And I remember maybe 10 years ago, we had quite positive leadership, and many of my relatives were employed in the schools to teach language. It was very positive, and this was for all students. So, we go from one side to the other. I think that's why art is very important, because artists have long-term or lifelong commitment to this cultural continuum, and this is generally the place where these things don't change, and they can be preserved. That's sort of the landscape, social landscape, and we just keep trying.
Okay, I'm afraid this is going to be the last question, just because we've got other programs going on. 我们现在楼上还有一个表演在4楼，然后它会在3点钟的时候差不多开始。But Megan, I think your film, we've loaded it. So what we should do that we'll play the film for 8 minutes, and then if you want to stay to watch the film, please do. And by 3 o'clock, we're going to start the performance on the 4th floor. But just in case that if you can't get in on the 4th, 就万一4楼已经人满，大家进不去的话，那个我们15点30分的时候，这个表演还会再进行一次，所以你可以在这个中间再看一下展览，然后再回来听第二个讲座。第二个讲座我们的时间是大家都上去，第二个时间是15点30分。那大家可以看完表演之后，然后再在15点30分回来看我们的第二个的讲座。然后如果这个表演看不见的话，大家可以待会儿再上去。I'm just saying that. People are moving upset, but 我们现在可以先把影片一起观看一下，然后再行动。谢谢。
The film has no sound. It's just video footage of the sculptures.